Parsing Linear Hierarchical English Phrases and Clauses, a video lecture. Greetings, online linguistics students. Although you may find parsing the structure and function of phrases and clauses challenging, How English Works, Chapter 6 is merely providing you with a new way of thinking about these linguistic structures, a new way to think about, to describe, and to analyze the grammar you already know. As speakers of English, you know how to combine words systematically into phrases and clauses, but most likely you have never had to articulate the underlying system. The challenge is, therefore, bridging that gap between linguistic competence and linguistic performance. While we've approached phonetics, phonology, and morphology from the mental to the physical, in analyzing syntactic structure, we will employ the opposite angle. We will analyze the performed or surface structure in order to understand the mental or deep structure. In the forming of sentences, words group together into the syntactic units known as constituents. A constituent is an individual word or a group of words that fill a single slot. So both a single word and a clause are constituents, but in grammatical analysis, it's phrase-level constituency that's important. These phrase-level constituents are recognizable pieces of sentences. Max Morenberg compares them to recognizable parts of a chicken, a wing, a breast, a thigh, a leg, and relates an anecdote of customers at a fast food chain finding unrecognizable pieces in their cartons. When they questioned the clerk, he replied brashly, "Pieces is pieces." Well, as pieces is not the case in chickens, so it is not the case in analyzing sentences. Sentences can be cut up into recognizable constituents of noun phrase, verb phrase, adjective phrase, adverb phrase, and prepositional phrase. If the constituency of a group of words is in question, the substitution test, the standalone test, the movement test, and or the coordination test may be helpful. However, these tests are not definitive, so sometimes you just have to trust your language instinct. Curzon and Adams analyzed the constituents of a sentence using phrase structure trees, which branch out to create more complex structures, picturing the hierarchical structure of language in an upside-down tree. However, these tree diagrams somewhat obscure the linearity of the English language. Analyzing sentences using underlining and labeling instead of phrase structure trees preserves both the hierarchy and the linearity of the English language, using less paper and saving some real trees in the process. While parsing is a general term for analyzing a sentence into component parts, we will use it specifically to mean analyzing by means of labeling and underlining. In our parsing, we will label both the structure or form and function of the phrase-level constituents, not merely the form, as do Curzon and Adams, providing a fuller understanding of the hierarchical relationships among the constituents. For a more detailed explanation of English phrase structures, see the handout Phrase Structure Rules, their reading, and their functions. This handout also includes a key for the abbreviations used for phrases and for lexical items, so you may want to print it out for reference during this lecture and while doing homework. In order to bridge this double gap from tree diagramming to parsing by labeling and underlining, and from structural nodes to structure and function, I'm going to demonstrate parsing of the phrases and sentences that Curzon and Adams diagram in the section on basic phrase structure trees, pages 174 to 179. This linear method of parsing is very methodical. You will learn it best by printing out the parsing handout and parsing along with me. For every sentence, our method will remain the same. We will move from left to right, labeling each lexical item. Then we will move from right to left, building the constituent phrases and indicating their functional relationships to each other until we have discovered a verb phrase functioning as predicate and a noun phrase functioning as subject, which two constituents comprise the sentence S. Let's begin with the sentence on page 174. Perplexed students reread the chapter. Perplexed is an adjective. Students is a noun. Reread is a verb. We don't know what type of verb until we look at the constituents in the predicate. So we'll need to wait before we label the verb type. Determiner for the and chapter is a noun. Now, moving from right to left, the chapter forms a noun phrase. How does this noun phrase function? What kind of verb do we have? The next constituent to the left is the verb, so there's only one constituent other than the main verb in the predicate. How does the verb relate the subject to this predicate noun phrase? It transfers action. So the predicate noun phrase functions as a direct object, and the verb reread is transitive. Without context, we cannot tell if this verb is present or past tense, but looking ahead at similar sentences, I think it is intended to be past tense. So now we can label the status of the main verb, which is past. Now that we have a main verb, do we have a complete predicate? Yes, we do. So we label the verb phrase functioning as predicate. Moving to the left again, perplexed and students form a noun phrase functioning as the subject. And these two constituents form a sentence. So we now have a complete sentence. You may underline the complete sentence and indicate it by S if you want to, but labeling at the S level seems unnecessary when parsing a simple sentence like this. So this is the way the final parsing looks. In the transcript of the lecture, I'm using table divisions instead of underlining as in the video lecture, because it is much easier to work with tables than with underlining in a Word document. I will talk my way through all of the following sentences and phrases diagrammed on pages 174 through 179, exactly as I've talked my way through this first one. But I think it's not necessary to type out all that talking. If necessary, you may view the video lecture again. The next sentence on page 175 adds a prepositional phrase to the predicate. So let's look at that sentence. We'll review our parsing methodology and see what happens. All right, going from left to right, we'll label the lexical items. The is a determiner. Perplexed is an adjective. Students is a noun. Reread is a verb. The is a determiner. Chapter is noun. In is a preposition. The is a determiner. And book is a noun. Now, working from right to left, the book forms a noun phrase functioning as the object of the preposition in. The next constituent is the prepositional phrase in the book. How does this prepositional phrase function? It patterns. Okay, do you remember the phrase structure rule? Noun phrase may consist of a noun phrase followed by a prepositional phrase. That's what we have here. This prepositional phrase patterns with this noun phrase, and so it functions as an adjective. The chapter then is a noun phrase, but it serves as the head of the larger noun phrase that is now the direct object of the transitive verb reread. So we see a good example of the hierarchical structure of the language here, how we have two constituents combining to make the larger noun phrase functioning as the direct object. We have our same verb, main verb, whose status is past, and then we have our verb phrase predicate, verb phrase functioning as predicate, and the perplexed students is a noun phrase functioning as the subject. So I hope that's clear. And of course, this would be our sentence if we drew that long line and put the S underneath. Next, Curzon and Adams look at some noun phrases that are not within sentences. So let's look at these. These old horse farm and big complicated trees on page 176. These phrases demonstrate structural ambiguity occasioned by the scope of an adjective. In the first example, old refers only to horse. So we have adjective, noun, noun. Farm here is going to be the noun phrase functioning as the head of the other. Okay, see how this works. Okay, so old horse combines into a noun phrase that functions as an adjective. Yes, and so our phrase is old horse farm. We don't know the function because we don't have a sentence to put it in. The second structure, old, refers to horse farm. So the horse farm is old. So old is an adjective. Here, horse is a noun functioning as an adjective for farm, the noun farm. And so this time, horse farm becomes the head of this noun phrase, and old modifies horse farm, and so then our noun phrase is structured this way. Noun functioning as adjective is one of the two function labels that we'll be using at the lexical level. All the others will be at the phrase level. The other lexical level function label will be for single word adverbs. We'll add their role there. Okay, of course, we cannot determine the structure of this phrase. No, the function of this phrase, right? We don't know how it's functioning. We cannot determine the function of this phrase. We know the structure, noun phrase, until we have some written context. However, stress differentiates the two in speech. This first one would be old horse farm, and this one would be old horse farm. So you can see there's a difference in stress and phrasing to differentiate these two phrases in speech. The next phrase that we look at is big complicated trees. Oh, well, okay. Okay, in the first one, there's a comma between big and complicated. So that gives us a clue that these are coordinated adjectives, and it's the same as the phrase big and complicated trees. So big, over here off the screen, is an adjective, complicated is an adjective, and trees is a noun, and they form one noun phrase. In the second example, however, big modifies the noun phrase complicated trees, indicating only the complicated trees that are big to the exclusion of any other size of complicated trees, such as small or medium. So here we have adjective, adjective, noun. We have exactly the same lexical items, but now complicated trees forms the head of the noun phrase, big complicated trees. So big modifies complicated trees in the second structure. Once again, written context is necessary to determine the function of this phrase, but speech makes them clear. Big complicated trees or big complicated trees. It's hard to do out of context, but maybe that gives you an idea. Now that we've encountered a prepositional phrase functioning as an adjective and explored the possible ambiguity occasioned by the scope of adjectives, we encounter a similar sentence with the prepositional phrase functioning as an adverb. Notice the different relationship between the prepositional phrase and the constituent that precedes it, and remember that we are going to label an adverb's role. So let's get our new sentence up here and review our parsing methodology. Okay, labeling from left to right. The is a determiner. Perplexed is an adjective. Students is a noun. Reread, we're going to go ahead and label as the transitive verb because we see the determiner the in the noun chapter coming up. Now we have the preposition over, determiner the, and noun weekend. Moving from right to left, the weekend is a noun phrase functioning as the object of the preposition over. We have a prepositional phrase then, and this prepositional phrase is functioning as an adverb of time. It doesn't pattern with the chapter. It's not the chapter that is over the weekend, it's the rereading that is over the weekend. So, the chapter, noun phrase, functioning as direct object. And then we have our main verb, whose status is past tense, forming, and these three constituents form the verb phrase functioning as the predicate. And once again, we have the perplexed students, noun phrase functioning as subject. Okay, let's see. All right, we covered that. So the predicate of this sentence with the adverbial prepositional phrase has three constituents. The sentence where the prepositional phrase functions as an adjective had only two constituents, the main verb and the direct object. So you see the difference there, the difference the patterning makes with the adjectival and the adverbial prepositional phrases. The diagrams of the sentence on pages 177 and 178 demonstrate structural ambiguity. So let's look at that sentence. Does the prepositional phrase in the predicate function as an adjective or an adverb? Yes. Is the cop holding the prop, or does the actress use it to trip him? Yes. Only context will tell. Then we'll know which of two possible ways to parse the structurally ambiguous sentence. So let's do one parsing. The is a determiner. Unpredictable is an adjective. We're moving from left to right, labeling our lexical items. Actress is a noun. Tripped is a verb. We'll find out what kind of verb later. The is a determiner. Cop is a noun. With is a preposition. The is a determiner. Prop is a noun. Okay, moving from right to left. The prop, a noun phrase, functioning as the object of the preposition with. With, prepositional phrase, and we're going to say this is functioning as an adjective. So this is, then the cop becomes a noun phrase that's the head of the noun phrase, functioning as the direct object of the transitive verb tripped. And so here's our main verb in the past tense. And then we have our complete predicate, verb phrase, verb phrase, functioning as predicate. And then we have the unpredictable actress, our noun phrase, functioning as the subject. So in this parsing, the cop is holding the prop. But let's look again. Let's look at the relationship of the prepositional phrase to other constituents in the predicate. Okay, this time, with is a prepositional phrase functioning as an adverb of instrument. And so it patterns with the verb tripped, not with the noun phrase cop. Now the cop is the noun phrase functioning as the direct object. And once again, we have three constituents forming the verb phrase functioning as the predicate. But in this case, the actress has used the prop to trip the cop, because she's unpredictable, of course. Resolving this syntactical ambiguity depends on whether with the prop patterns with the cop or with tripped. Such ambiguity can be humorous, but it can also lead to tragic misunderstanding. The last phrase demonstrates the possible ambiguity of an adjective when a coordinating conjunction is involved. So let's look at this last phrase. Old men and women. Okay, in the first structure, both the men and the women are old because the conjunction joins men and women into a noun phrase for old to modify. So old is an adjective, men is a noun, and is a conjunction, women is a noun. In this case, the conjunction patterns with the lexical unit or the phrase that follows it. And so this is a noun phrase. And then men and women would be a noun phrase functioning as the head of the larger noun phrase, old men and women. So this has to do with the ambiguous scope of the adjective old. In the second structure, only men are old because old forms a noun phrase, old men forms a noun phrase before being conjoined to women to form a larger noun phrase. So adjective, noun, conjunction, noun. Women and women is a noun phrase. And let's see, how did I do that? Yes. And old men is a noun phrase, and then they combine into a noun phrase. I think that's the way that goes. Anyway, you can see the ambiguous scope of the adjective old. Once again, speech differentiates with stress and phrasing. We have old men and women, or we have old men and women. So speech is clearer than writing many times. I hope that you've been parsing along on your handout as you viewed this lecture. Review your parsings to see if you have any questions about any of the structures or functions or the way that the constituents combine hierarchically. You may view the video lecture and practice your parsings as many times as you need to in order to feel confident about this material and this method. If, after reviewing, you still have questions, ask them in the Parsing Q&A forum on the discussion board for Session 8, where I will try to clear up any confusions. If you have a question, it's likely that your classmates do too, and all can benefit from such a question and answer forum. Thank you for your attention, and Godspeed in your parsing.